This isn't a time to celebrate for Max Harris because this community's sick. This community's sick because the leadership is sick.
The judge declared a mistrial in the Almena case, and he will face a new trial. The wildfire burning near Murrieta has now destroyed 2,000 acres, and new evacuation orders were issued today for several neighborhoods. The fire is now only 7% contained. NTSB investigators continue to look into Monday's deadly boat fire near Santa Cruz Island. Today, the NTSB said a plan to get the boat out of the water is being finalized.
Currently, there are divers assessing the accident site and what's needed to recover the vessel.
The LA Times reports crew members have told investigators the fire was simply too intense to save anyone. Steve Clausen, California News.
Be a flu fighter with a free flu shot from Walgreens. It's no cost to you with most insurance. It's quick, easy, with no appointment needed. Plus, it lowers your chances of spreading the flu to the people you care about most. Get your flu shot by September 16th and get a coupon for $5 off an eligible purchase of $15 that day. This is your shot to protect you and the ones you love. Be a flu fighter. Walgreens. Trusted since 1901. Coupon offer not valid in Arizona, New Jersey, or New York. See coupon for terms and restrictions. Vaccine subject to availability and some restrictions may apply.
Now's the time to travel and be with the people you care about the most. And at Holiday Inn and Holiday Inn Express, we're helping you be there for less. Save at least 25% at thousands of hotels worldwide if you book by September 24th. You won't want this moment to pass you by. So book today at holidayinn.com. Terms and conditions apply.
NBC News Radio, I'm Brian Shook. Hurricane Dorian is spawning tornadoes across the Carolinas. This morning, a twister hit a mobile home park in Emerald Isle, North Carolina, destroying a number of homes. No one was hurt in that tornado. Dorian will continue hitting the Carolinas through today and into tomorrow. Meteorologist Bill Cairns details the storm's latest track.
It goes past the Wilmington area. I don't know if we're going to get a landfall or not, but at least a portion of the eye will be through this beach area. That will be happening as we go from about 9 p.m. till about midnight. And then by about 2 to 3 a.m., the potential landfall, Carteret County here, Morehead City area, and then going over the Outer Banks.
The death toll in the Bahamas is rising. At least 23 people have died on the island as a result of Dorian, and Bahamas Minister of Health Dr. Dwayne Sands says that number is expected to increase. The verdict is in for two men blamed for the deaths of 36 people in an Oakland warehouse fire in 2016. A mistrial was declared for Ghost Ship warehouse master tenant Derek Almena when the jury couldn't agree whether to convict him. Creative director Max Harris was found not guilty. U.S. Middle East envoy Jason Greenblatt is leaving the Trump administration.
President Trump confirmed the departure in a tweet praising Greenblatt's dedication to Israel and to seeking peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Trump said Greenblatt will be leaving after 3 years to pursue work in the private sector. Greenblatt has worked with White House advisor Jared Kushner on crafting a Middle East peace proposal, which has not been released. Kushner is Trump's son-in-law. Tom Roberts, NBC News Radio.
The NTSB says smoke detectors didn't stir the crew on board a boat that caught fire off the California coast and ended up killing dozens of people. The crew was sleeping on the top level, and by the time they realized there was a fire, the kitchen area was fully engulfed. The NTSB also says they're investigating whether electrical gear that was charging may have started the fire. You're listening to the latest from NBC News Radio.
Hello, green tea lovers. It's John Harrison with Do Matcha Matcha Green Tea. Our ceremonial spring harvest matcha green tea is delicate and mild. A green tea rich in antioxidants. A smart choice with breakfast, lunch, or before going to the gym. No calories and great taste. Do Matcha Green Tea. This is John Harrison. Thank you for your time.
It's time to make the Tri-City Center in Redlands a regular part of your weekly shopping experience. Tri-City is home to a wide assortment of quality businesses, including the all-new Ocean Aquatics. Check out their variety of exotic tropical fish, along with fish food, accessories, and tanks of all shapes and sizes. The Tri-City Center is located just off of Alabama and the Tennessee exits in Redlands. Visit the Tri-City Center today and find out why it's called the Mall with a Heart.
Ladies, and guys too, you work hard. And once in a while, you have to take care of yourself. When it's time to pamper yourself, to take care of yourself, your next stop should be Next Gen Nails and Spa in Redlands in the Tri-City Center. It's very special. Relax. Enjoy this special, luxurious treatment that you deserve. And leave your stress behind with the best beauty care and a royal spa pedicure that includes a warm water soak, trim, sea salt scrub, paraffin therapy, and a luxurious hot lotion massage. You deserve it, and you deserve it today. Look good, feel good at Next Gen Nail and Spa in Redlands because you're worth it. And for a quick session, join Next Gen on Wednesdays for their $10 off spa treatments happy hour from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. The salon is always squeaky clean and waiting. So for the best beauty care and to treat yourself, it's Next Gen Nails and Spa at 1470 Industrial Park Avenue in Redlands, or Google Next Gen Nails and Spa in Redlands.
Are you ready for a new experience? To see life from another point of view? New hope, new expression, new joy. This is your radio hour. Welcome to Viewpoint with Father John.
And welcome, friends. You are tuned to KCAA Radio, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or from anywhere in the world at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John, and I am your host, Father John Reid. By the way, you can follow this show on Instagram and Facebook. Just go to Viewpoint with Father John. And if you missed any of the other episodes, if you go to YouTube, simply type in Viewpoint with Father John, KCAA, and you can catch all of our past shows. All of God's children are endowed with extraordinary purpose and ability. I'm on a quest to help as many as possible in fully realizing their divinely inspired potential. Disposing a false narrative and embracing genuineness inspires clarity of purpose. My role is to help overcome self-imposed limitations in realizing one's spiritual potential. And brothers and sisters, Viewpoint with Father John is a listener-supported program, so you are the ones who keep us on the air every week. So please go to viewpointwithfatherjohn.com, go to the support button, and give whatever you can. And for those of you who have been giving, I thank you. Also, at this time, I'd like to invite you to buy a copy of my book, Close Your Eyes So You Can See Me. The premise of this book is that we are all God's children, and that we do not need one more ounce of self-improvement. What we really need is self-discovery. Close Your Eyes So You Can See Me is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and on most online bookstores. So get your copy today. And remember, it's not too early to start shopping for Christmas for this year, next year, and the years to come. You want to get all these books you can. Also, I'd like to tell you about Claremont Pharmacy in Claremont, California, on the corner of Indian Hill Boulevard and Arrow Highway. There, Dr. Nikki Ho runs the best pharmacy in all the Inland Empire. That's where I go for my diabetic supplies. So go say hello to Dr. Nikki Ho and tell him Father John sent you. Also, on Tuesday, you may not be aware of this, so I just want to make you aware of it. Tuesday is International Suicide Prevention Day, and there's going to be a workshop on how to talk to people who are dealing with depression and suicidal ideation. It's being hosted by Tri-City Mental Health and the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill. And that will take place at the UCC Church in Claremont this Tuesday from 3 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. So if you would like to be part of this, I believe there's no charge for admittance. It's really good because all of us know somebody who's dealing with depression and possible suicidal thoughts. Tonight I'm really excited because one of my heroes is my guest tonight, probably one of the smartest people I've ever known, and that's my older brother, Dr. Bob Reid. He has a Ph.D. and his doctorate is in business administration, if I'm correct. Is that correct, Bob?
It is, John.
All right. Well, glad to have you on the show, and seems like I've known you most of my life, so...
For better or for worse, buddy.
That's right. Till one of us dies. I got you. I want to talk a little bit about what you do. Now, you have a really interesting position with Maddox Foundation, and you do a lot of really important charitable work in your area and around the world. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, John, I live my professional life in three unequal buckets. The first and most substantive is that I'm the CEO of the J.F. Maddox Foundation. which is the largest private foundation in the state of New Mexico, and we work in a very specific area of New Mexico in the southeast quadrant, looking at trying to improve the quality of life, creating more sustainable communities. The second bucket that I'm active in is I do research, and as you know, I do publications on philanthropy.
Right.
And the third is my own exercise of philanthropy, where I work with a wonderful organization out of Houston, Texas, called the United for Change Center, in lifting women in extreme poverty out of their circumstances in developing nations in South America and in East Africa.
Right. In fact, you were just in Bolivia not too long ago, were you not?
I'm actually going next week. I'll be going to Colombia on Sunday to look at a possible project with Venezuelan refugees. I have to say that it's a sad state of affairs there and here when refugees are characterized as illegal immigrants. I never understood refugees to fit that category.
Right.
Then I will go directly from Colombia to Bolivia to work on two projects. One is our Empowering Women project, which we've been working on for several years, and the other is a project that's bringing water for the very first time to two villages that were facing extermination as a result of just not having the resources to be able to sustain life. So we've been successful at raising the funds and establishing the engineering and bringing water into those communities so that they can continue their indigenous lifestyle without having to go to the urban centers where they unfortunately get exploited.
So you're leaving a very small footprint there, just helping them to have their basic needs met. Would that be a good capitalization of what you're talking about?
It is for the water project. For the women, it's a little more involved. It's sort of a three-pronged strategy. Mm-hmm. One is that women in Bolivia in particular are typically denied an education. They remain illiterate. They are unable to read or write, which traps them in circumstances that are very difficult for them, where they're exploited for their labor and, frankly, exploited in relationships. So we have a literacy program that teaches them how to read and write. Part of that includes leadership skills. Then the next part has to do with health care. 80% of the women in Bolivia never acknowledge that they're pregnant. Wow. So they do not get prenatal care, they do not get well baby care, and as a result, morbidity rates are off the charts. So we teach them how to manage access to health care, and we also bring in medical teams and develop local health care professionals on the ground who we teach how to deal with the cultural awareness and sensitivity that they need to be able to work with indigenous populations. The third leg, which is what we're actually working on right now, can only be done when the first two are established, and that is we teach women entrepreneurialism skills and then bring the capital in to help them start micro-enterprises that they own. These women work in very dangerous mines. They're so dangerous that when they don't come out, they just have a little ceremony from outside. They don't even go in to look for them. They just assume that they've fallen off a cliff and that they've died. And they do this for untold numbers of hours per day for 50 cents a day.
Wow.
So the micro-enterprises that we help them to develop that they own enable them to earn substantially higher income, which means that they can care for their families, but they also have greater independence. Go ahead.
I wanted to go back and ask you about something you mentioned because it just struck me really heavy, and I might already have some of the answer to it as to why they don't want to acknowledge that they're pregnant. Is that because they wouldn't be able to work and they're afraid they're not able to help support their family? What are some of the psychosocial reasons for that?
Well, there are two. One is that there probably is no place on earth where women are more disparaged than in places like Bolivia. And they are taught from the time they're born that they only have two sources of value on this earth. One is to bear children, and the other is to be able to contribute labor toward the economic sustainability of a family.
Right.
So when we first start going in, these women, they won't even look me in the eye. It's very disturbing and disconcerting because they don't think that they're good enough to look me in the eye. But after we take them through these programs, they are they own the ground they're on. They feel better about themselves, and they realize for probably the first time in their lives that they're worthy of things like medical care. That they actually can have the expectations of others, and that they can themselves achieve in a way that allows them to be more sustainably independent.
Right. Which would be, that's a real paradigm shift when you talk about the culture you're describing, for them to even look at themselves with that kind of value. So that's very important work you're doing there. What inspired you to do that, if I may ask?
You know, one day I showed up, probably about 10 or 11 years ago, to a Rotary Club that I belong to. And I was there early. I got my lunch, went to sit down, and there was a young woman sitting there by herself that I did not recognize, was clearly not a member of the club. So I went over to sit down next to her and to greet her and ask her if she was the program, and she was. And I asked her to talk to me about what she did. And she is the CEO, the founder of this wonderful nonprofit out of Houston, United for Change Center, that when she described what she did, it touched my heart. And we became friends very quickly. She asked me to serve as one of her advisors for her nonprofit. She has some pretty amazing advisors that she's connected with over the years, but I'm the one that's more involved on the operating side. So that led to, she asked me if I would eventually put a group together and go down to Bolivia and meet with these women and look at the projects, which I did. And then she asked me if I would perform the evaluation of some of the projects there.
Oh.
She then asked me if I would go with a group to East Africa to do the feasibility analysis for a project there. So I've been going every year now for several years.
Wow. That's incredible. That's got to be really difficult work. I mean, you're going to some horrific conditions, but yet you're doing a lot of good, it sounds like.
You know, we go up into the Andes. When we arrive in Bolivia, we land in La Paz, which is about 13,000 feet up in elevation. It's the highest metropolitan city in the world.
Yes.
But then we go up to about 18,000 feet before we descend into a valley, where we settle in probably about 12,000 feet to do our work. And the roads that we go on are, you know, they're about as wide as a package of gum, and yet there will be two-way traffic and no guardrails on the side, but the cliffs will go down several thousand feet. So it's pretty daunting, the conditions that you have to go through to get there. It's quite an adventure.
Weren't you in a vehicle one time that got a flat tire or something going along that way?
Yes, we were all traveling to a village that we'd been asked to go to. They were having some particular problems, and so we had chartered a van, and it had a flat tire, and the spare tire turned out not to have enough air in it. So we didn't have time for somebody to come out and replace the tire. So we jumped on a bus with chickens and bags of potatoes that took us to the village. And we met with the village that afternoon. We dined with them. And then the funny thing about it was that they put us in an ambulance to come back. We drove all the way back to La Paz in an ambulance on dirt roads, bumping all over the place with no seats or anything. And I was very concerned because I was the guest speaker for a Rotary Club in La Paz, and we were very late. And we showed up 2.5 hours late. Typical American anal retentive. I can't believe we're going to be this late. The light's going to be out. People are going to be gone. We will have missed the opportunity. And the Bolivians kept saying, "No, don't worry. Turns out we were the earliest ones to the event.
Well, speaking of flat tires, I'm up against our first commercial break, and if I don't go to break, Frank's going to run out and flatten the tires of my car. So my guest this evening is Dr. Bob Reid, and we'll be back in 2 and 2 on Viewpoint with Father John.
The loss of a loved one is one of the most challenging experiences in a person's life. It's hard to know where to turn to make your loved one's final arrangements. Jesse Ruiz at Personal Funeral Planning in Ontario will treat you and your loved one with the respect you deserve. Jesse served in the Marine Corps in Desert Storm and understands what it takes to provide loyal, personalized, and empathetic service to those who need it most. The families of Michael Jackson, Brittany Murphy, Ed McMahon, and many others have trusted Jesse to provide them with the highest level of service and support. To work with Jesse, call 909-762-4027, 909-762-4027, or visit their website, www.4pfp.org. www.4pfp as in personalfuneralplanning.org. Jesse Ruiz and Personal Funeral Planning, veteran-owned and operated, helping you plan a personal, lasting tribute for your loved one. www.4pfp.org.
It's time to shop in the cool, relaxed comfort of the Tri-City Shopping Center in Redlands, conveniently located on the I-10 freeway between the Alabama and Tennessee exits. Bring the kids too and watch them play in the only indoor fun center, High Five Indoor Playground, where parents are welcomed on the playground. Birthday celebrations are encouraged, so make plans for some great fun at the mall. More reasons why the Tri-City Center is called the Mall with a Heart.
And welcome back. You're tuned to KCAA Radio, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or on the World Wide Web at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John, and I am your host, Father John Reid. And my guest this evening is none other than my older brother, Dr. Bob Reid, who I'm very proud of, who is without a doubt the smartest person I've ever known. Of course, I run around with a lot of people at Disneyland, so I don't know how much that means. But he truly is the smartest guy I know. And we're talking about some of his philanthropic trips he takes to help empower women who would otherwise not get some of these opportunities. So you had just gotten to the meeting, you were 2.5 hours late, and you were the first people getting there.
Yes. That's called Bolivia time.
Right.
So it's actually considered disrespectful to show up at the appointed time for an event in Bolivia.
Oh, wow.
And as an anal retentive American, that was something I had to find a way to relax about and accept. But the Bolivian people are incredibly gracious.
Oh.
They're wonderful people, very proud people, very generous. It's interesting because it's a socialist country, but they're probably some of the most entrepreneurial people I've ever met.
Interesting. I guess I would go to show that some of the information we get over here about some of these terms aren't always accurate to how they're put into practice with different cultures. You know, you're talking about the time differences, and the diocese where I served for many years, 98% of the priests are Filipino, and I'd always be the first person everywhere we would have a gathering. And one day they said, you know, this is what we call island time. So if we say it's 2 o'clock, it means from 2 o'clock anywhere on, we'll start showing up. I said, oh, okay, so it's not 2 o'clock when you say 2 o'clock. He says, no, that's just give you a reference point.
Well, I've worked with a lot of Filipinos, incredibly wonderful people, and a lot of Filipino nurses that are remarkably well trained and incredible caregivers. In fact, I chartered a plane once to bring an entire plane of Filipino nurses to help staff a hospital that I was responsible for in Texas. And they single-handedly turned that hospital around.
Yes.
Great people, but they too, you know, the interesting thing about Hispanics is that when you say Hispanics, that's a really big tent, because there are black Hispanics, brown Hispanics, white Hispanics, there are Oriental Hispanics.
Yes.
I don't know that there's another ethnic group that has this big a tent in that sense of ethnicity as Hispanics are.
That's true, and most people don't realize that. In fact, a lot of people consider they think Mexico, and they don't think about Spain. In fact, most Filipinos prefer to be referred to as Pacific Islanders, not necessarily Oriental. And I found that out the hard way when dealing with some of these priests and how seriously they take that. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's amazing. Now, I want to go back in time a little bit with you, because you and I have had some wonderful adventures throughout the years, and you've had some ones that I've always admired. And one that I've bragged on quite a bit that you did was Rancho Laguna Seca up in San Jose. What was it? We called it the $3 million drunk tank at one time, something like that.
Well, it's interesting because that was one of my 4 careers when I was working in addictions.
Right.
And at 26 years of age, I got a hair. And I had done an internship in Skid Row, Los Angeles, when I was studying at Cal Poly Pomona, and I fell in love with the people on the streets. I found them to be some of the most genuine, decent, charitable, and giving people I'd ever met.
Yes.
And when I left that internship, I couldn't get it out of my blood, and I decided, if given the opportunity, I wanted to be part of a new project. So at 26, I founded what I think at that time was the largest freestanding treatment center in Northern California, dedicated to addicts who were street people. And that, as you know, it was a magnificent, beautiful facility on 28 acres of landscaped hillside with a pond and ducks and all brand new buildings, which we used HUD funding to build those buildings.
Right.
But unfortunately, even though we were able to provide services for 1/5 the cost of putting people in jail, and according to the National Institutes of Alcoholism and Alcohol Abuse, our outcomes were 10 times the national average with that population. They were getting a real bargain, and they were getting good outcomes, but the attitudes had changed politically in the country at that time. That was in the early 80s. And there was a sentiment that there was a desire to sort of punish people in those kinds of circumstances rather than to provide alternatives to lift people out of those circumstances.
Yes.
And it went pretty far in that project, and all the way up to and including, as a 26-year-old, what did I have? I couldn't bring capital to the table, so everything was built on county-owned property, Santa Clara County, for which I had a $1 a year lease. And there was a desire to close this facility, not because it wasn't performing well. They actually sent 2 grand juries to try to find something, and I ended up getting a commendation from the second grand jury, which has never happened before and hasn't happened since. Because I had taken an oath of poverty to do this, and we had a very clean operation. But they then tried to take it by force, sending the sheriff's prison cars out to circle the facility and turn it into a jail.
Wow.
But I knew they were coming, so I had the media waiting for them, and they ended up leaving with their tail between their legs. The sheriff, who actually was a friend of mine at the time, he was just following orders, but he had a ranch house that was contiguous to this property that was his conference center. And after this happened, I went in, moved all of his stuff out of that facility onto the street side, and moved 10 homeless women in and never give it back to them.
Oh, I see you read Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Subtlety was not my long suit at that point in time, but I was very frustrated and very concerned about these people, and I just didn't see anybody else willing to fight for them. So I just put my big boy pants on and went out and fought the political battle of my life for 6 years.
Well, yeah, and I wish we could say that we've continued to move forward in that industry, but we haven't. We've actually regressed quite a bit. One of the things I thought was a mistake, and there's a lot of people who argue with me about this, is when we put Department of Alcohol and Drugs directly under mental health, so it was one funding for everybody. And I think in the Inland Empire, that really caused a lot of damage and dried up a lot of resources. So it's a shame. I wish we can go back to some of the things that we were trying back in the 80s that was really working. Social model recovery was really a good thing back then. And right now, it's getting harder and harder for that to survive. Everybody wants it medical. And I don't have anything against medical. I think it certainly has its place. But I think it should be both, not either or. So,
John, there are three general kinds of therapeutic facilities where people can go in and get inpatient or residential care. There is the medical model in a hospital-based program, which costs usually between $2,000 and $3,000 a day.
Right.
There is the mental health model, which is sort of a hybrid that tends to cost between $300 and $500 a day. And then there is what California has, which is called the social model, which is a recovery home model, more of a peer-based kind of facility, that last time I checked was costing somewhere in the $70 to $80 a day range. The research says there's no clinical difference in the outcome between these facilities. As you pointed out, there certainly are times where somebody needs to be in a medical facility because of medical complications.
Right.
But there was actually a study done many years ago in Illinois that showed that if you put people into a hospital environment who are addicts, they think they're sick and they tend to react in sicker ways. If you put them in a home-like environment, for some reason, there is 27% less incidence of DTs or convulsions. So there's a lot to be said about the social model that California has developed. It's far more economic, which means you can extend the services further because it's just not very expensive to do.
Mm-hmm.
It has the same clinical outcome in terms of effectiveness as the other modalities, but we've, as a society, never come to terms with what the public policy ought to be around the kind of publicly funded resources for people who need to go somewhere and to be able to deal with their addiction problem.
Right. Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. Well, there's really bad information. In fact, I was telling Frank, who's our sound engineer, before the show, we're talking about something to do with substance abuse, and I had mentioned that there's a lot of misinformation about substances that are out there. Case in point, for years, people would say, oh, people who take heroin, they're addicted from the very first use. And I said, no, that's not true. They do build up, and it is addictive, but it's very few of them that from the very first use of it was absolutely addicted. And they do that with a lot of different drugs. And it's like anything else, we build up a thing to it. And getting good information can sometimes be difficult because there's fighting networks I'm trying to find a nice way to put this that doesn't kick too many people in the shin. Other than a lot of the drug companies and the DEA, not real good reliable information on some of the things that are out there, unfortunately. So.
Well, we see all of the states' attorney generals bringing lawsuits now against drug manufacturers for very egregiously pushing opiates,
yes.
And creating a much more acute drug problem that we have today. And if you look over time, the drug of choice has changed substantially.
Yes.
When you're talking about non-alcohol kinds of drugs. And actually, I'm doing a podcast this fall with a psychiatrist who does distance education for primary care physicians for medication-assisted opioid addiction treatment.
Oh.
And which is really interesting to me. But that is the big public policy challenge right now, and there are certain things that we just don't have appropriate public policy to deal with, and so the result is it's kind of almost a cowboy-type environment for industry, even for providers of services. I just talked about three radically different costs of service. that generally, I'm not going to say exclusively, but probably for 90+% of the people who are going to seek confined therapeutic services, there's no difference between them. How is it that we don't have some kind of rationing process that seeks to create more service capacity by going to the least costly, but just as effective modality? And California's done a lot of that, but California also has created other classes of care that for which people are still getting reimbursed at a much higher level.
Wow. Well, one of the things that I find to be a real problem, and some people may disagree with me, but I really feel strongly about this, is the fact that we're doing privately owned jails, prisons, those types of institutions. A lot of people are getting sentenced to these places, not getting treatment, but people are making profit off their illness for the fact that they know they're going to just keep doing a revolving door because they're really not getting a treatment program. They're just being housed at about $700 a day per inmate. So depending on what location.
You know, the presumption behind private prisons is that the private sector can provide more efficiently certain services than the public sector can provide. And what actually has been borne out in that regard is that the way that their costs are lower is that they provide fewer services to the inmates, which means that the inmates have less chance of actually changing their course, which means recidivism is more likely to occur, and that the employees end up having fewer benefits and are paid substantially less.
Yes.
So essentially what we've done is we've decided to put on the backs economically of the people who are at the lowest end of that spectrum the opportunity to create a massive industry in a country that does more jailing of its citizens than any other country in the world.
Yes. Well, look at what's happening down in Texas and some of these other places with the family separations, that we're not even providing toothbrushes, decent places to sleep, clean water, or decent food. And we're paying over $750 per person in these facilities. So someone's making quite a profit at the misery of people who, many of them didn't come here illegally. They came here seeking asylum, which we have an obligation with our standing in our agreements around the world that we will honor that. It's in our laws that we honor it. And I don't see how we're going to recover from this real easily. I think we've really created quite a spot for ourselves.
You know, we're a democracy, and there's room for disparate opinion, for spirited debate.
Right.
And there are good arguments on both sides of the immigration debate in terms of creating opportunity and at the same time having a border that is not completely porous. But I haven't talked to anybody, despite their political views on this issue, who thinks it's a good idea to imprison children and to fail to provide the basic services when you do that.
Right.
So, you know, that seems to be something that there is, at least in my experience, a lot of common concern about. One of the things that I worry about as well, again, is that many of the folks that are providing these services on the border under government contracts are private for-profit entities. You know, and where is the profit in all of this? What are we not doing that in order to create that profit that we should be doing? I was interviewed by Reuters recently because I live in an area that is very rapidly growing. We are the most prolific oil and gas producing area in our state. We're the second highest producing oil county in the nation, and the industry thinks we'll become number one by the end of the year. And they wanted to know what was the role of immigrants in this growing economy. And what they learned was that if we didn't have immigrants, we could not meet our labor demands here. That what's happening is the people are coming in relatively skilled, ready to go to work in the oil and gas fields. And were they not here, my guess is that the price of gasoline would probably be as much as $1 a gallon higher across the nation than it is today, as a result of having immigrants who are filling jobs that Americans are not beating a path to respond to the need for.
Right.
So, when we talk about immigration, there's not a one-size-fits-all, I think, argument for this.
Right.
Because in a circumstance like where we're at, the people who are coming across that border are skilled. They're ready to go to work. It's interesting because they're very entrepreneurial, hardworking, honest, family-oriented, and they want little or nothing from government.
Yes.
That sounds like what I thought Republicans were. So I don't understand how things just change over time, and it's one party will take one position, and then another party will take that same position decades down the road, and it's hard to know who are you in these conversations.
Well, speaking of hard economics, Frank has given me a look through the glass that I have to go to our next commercial break. And so we'll continue this conversation on the other side of the break. You're listening to Viewpoint with Father John, and my guest is Dr. Bob Reid.
KCAA Loma Linda, 1050 AM, K292 FQ Riverside, and K293 CF Moreno Valley.
The loss of a loved one is one of the most challenging experiences in a person's life. It's hard to know where to turn to make your loved one's final arrangements. Jesse Ruiz at Personal Funeral Planning in Ontario will treat you and your loved one with the respect you deserve. Jesse served in the Marine Corps in Desert Storm and understands what it takes to provide loyal, personalized, and empathetic service to those who need it most. The families of Michael Jackson, Brittany Murphy, Ed McMahon, and many others have trusted Jesse to provide them with the highest level of service and support. To work with Jesse, call 909-762-4027, 909-762-4027, or visit their website, www.4pfp.org. www.4pfp as in personalfuneralplanning.org. Jesse Ruiz and Personal Funeral Planning, veteran-owned and operated, helping you plan a personal, lasting tribute for your loved one. www.4pfp.org.
Ramirez Brothers Concrete in Riverside reminds area drivers, when you see a school bus stopped, there are probably children on foot nearby. These kids may not have much experience crossing streets or watching for cars. Never pass a school bus, no matter which side of the road you're traveling. It's the law. That important life-saving reminder is courtesy of your concrete professionals at Ramirez Brothers Concrete. For estimates, call 951-906-0827 for Ramirez Brothers Concrete in Riverside.
And welcome back. You're tuned to KCAA Radio, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or you can listen from anywhere in the world at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John. I am your host, Father John Reid. Quick shout out to our sound engineer, Frank, who's been out there. How's Major Tom doing? He was having some trouble this last week.
Well, Major Tom, after 2 vet visits and several $100s, turned out to just be really constipated.
Wow. So he's in politics.
He's fit for it.
Well, I'm glad to know he had a cathartic experience. Well, thanks for being here, Frank. And again, my guest this evening is my brother, Dr. Bob Reid, and we're talking about a few things. And when we left, we were talking a little bit about different approaches to the immigration, which is kind of funny we wound up on that topic. But it is an important one with some of the things going on right now. Some people may not be aware, but this last week, several people who are here on medical conditions were given 33 days to leave, and they were invited to come to this country for medical research, and there was no rollout of this program. The news wasn't made aware of it. In fact, many agencies didn't know about it. what happened was these families started getting these letters, Boilermaker style, saying we're no longer honoring this program. You have 33 days to get out. And so the Civil Liberties Union had to get involved, and several other agencies, to including the Irish Fighting Fund, to put a stay on this thing. Now, it's been paused, but as people don't see, it's not going away. It's just being paused while it's in the media. So they're planning on going back to this at some point. I don't know if you heard about any of that, Bob. Do you know about some of that?
Yes, unfortunately, I had heard about that. In full disclosure, I'm an independent.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like Louis Black, the comedian. You elect them, I'll make fun of them.
Right.
And I make fun of the Republicans and the Democrats whenever I think they're being hypocritical.
Right.
And unfortunately, right now, my concern is that policy on immigration is being driven more by political soundbite than it is by thoughtfulness and concern about human dignity.
Yes.
And that's evident in all the stories that we're seeing, whether it is the tragic revocation of the opportunity to pursue medical treatment when people were actually invited to be here and be part of that, or whether it's imprisoning children or providing them something to eat or toothbrushes or showers. All of that is intended to play to a particular audience for political gain, not because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And I think both sides are to blame for the gridlock. The ultimate problem that we have on this whole immigration issue is we have a totally broken immigration policy.
Mm-hmm.
I think we all agree that we want people to be here legally. We don't want people to have to be in the shadows to be part of the American dream.
Right.
And what I've graduated from 4 business schools. What I hear from my friends in industry is they're desperate for labor. We are below full employment by any economic measure in this country, and we're at a point where we actually are going to be fueling negative growth in certain sectors only because of the inability to provide labor for the companies in those sectors.
Sure.
So we ought to have a process that is judicious, that is has clear criteria, that can be efficient, where people can get a work visa and work toward becoming citizens if they're appropriate for the country in a timely process. But nobody is proposing legislation to get that done.
I got to see some of this firsthand when I was with the former diocese, because I handled all the R1 visas, which is religious visas for our priests to come over and to be able to practice their vocation. And when I first took over that position, it really wasn't difficult to get an R1 visa. And towards the middle of the last administration, it became more and more difficult, to where we were having more priests put on hold for coming over than we were able to bring over. And all of them were legitimate. They all were taken care of financially. But yeah, it was just really getting crazy. And now I look at what's happening, and I'm no longer in that position. Thanks be to God, from whom all blessings flow. But to see how it's changed and become more and more broken, I agree with you with that. And, it comes back to something you and I learned years ago. It's a matter of getting out of who's right and into what's right. And what's right is we're dealing with human beings. And we've always been the shining light on the hill about bringing people over. Now our behavior hasn't always been the shining hill. We have a lot to answer for, but we also have a lot of good that we've done. And it used to be that this was a place to go, but almost every single population has gone through it. The Irish went through it. The Germans went through it. The Japanese certainly went through it.
The Italians.
And it seems like we keep going full circle. The pendulum goes one way for a while, and then it swings really far the other way. And right now we're really at a high swing that isn't helping anybody, I don't think.
Well, we have a long history of resisting immigration despite being a country of immigrants.
Yes.
And, there's a biological process called homeostasis It basically is this biological process that over some period of time allows us to continue to look the same. I mean, every day we lose every cell from our face, and we wake up the next day and we still look the same.
Right.
That's homeostasis. Well, there is a sociological homeostasis process of trying to create sameness. That's where you have, in families, for example, unspoken rules. Nobody ever talked about them, but everybody knows what those rules are.
Mm-hmm.
They're not intentional. They're not necessarily explicit, but they are very well known. And it's about creating sameness within each social group. So it's not unusual, if you look around the world, for a group to say, well, if you come in, we're going to feel differently about ourselves and look different, and we don't want to do that. But as human beings, we have to rise above that and recognize that what's been our strength as a country, what's actually allowed us to be able to achieve in our best times, has been great diversity and the ability to attract some of the best and brightest people from around the world, and as well as the people who are fully trained, people who are willing to come in and work hard for the American dream, that they're willing to labor and sacrifice in order to achieve. And we've seen example after example after example of how cultures have been absorbed in this country, and the result at the end was the country was stronger.
Yes.
But we tend to resist it, and that resistance is it's subconscious, and it's below the level of how we think about things. We have to rise above that to realize we are at a place now that if we don't fix our broken immigration system, we're actually going to fall behind other parts of the world, only because we don't have the labor to pursue the innovations that we're capable of doing.
Yes, I agree. Well, and we're also, most people coming over are very hardworking people. When I was 18 and just starting out doing some college, I rented a room in Guasti. You remember Guasti with all the wineries and everything? The vineyards?
Yeah.
And they had these little cells that you could rent for $65 a month. The bathroom was down the hall. Everyone used the same bathroom, the same kitchen. And mainly it was the migrant workers. And on the weekend, these wonderful people, after working hard all week picking grapes for Brookside Winery, they would come out. A couple of guys would have guitars. They would have their cerveza. They would bring all their stuff together to cook and have a community meal. And they were some of the most generous people I've ever met, and just some of the hardest working people I ever met. And so I always have that image in my mind when we start talking about immigration stuff, because I think, we got to get back to we're dealing with people, not labels. So, yeah, I would agree with you that both sides need to get their stuff together. And I, too, am an independent, and so I don't have a dog in the fight for either particular party, but I do have a dog in the fight as an American who would like to see us treat all people with dignity and love. I think each person is entitled to that. So.
There was a time that I took great pride in the fact that our country was viewed by much of the world as being the one place that was high-minded, fair, even-spirited, and respectful to all persons.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that luster that we had has been lost.
Yeah. And I don't think we'll ever have that luster again, but we can have a new kind of luster if we pull together and come up with a new understanding of who we are as a people. I think we're having to go through a conscious wake-up call. What is our consciousness of this country that this is being passed as okay, when it's, any moral fiber that I have says this is not okay, that we're hurting a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, my theory for a long time has been that before we had the internet, the first network was mankind. Mm-hmm. That we're all interconnected at a spiritual level.
Yes.
When you have hurting somewhere, you will eventually have hurting everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
When you resolve hurting somewhere, you will benefit elsewhere.
Yes.
It's the old, what goes around comes around.
Well, and Dr. Bernie Siegel used to talk a lot about that in his different writing dealing with the spirituality of medicine. So there's a lot of truth in what you're saying there. And, well, we're in our last few minutes, and what are some thoughts you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Well, I've enjoyed this conversation a great deal, and I hope that nothing that I've said is in any way intended to demean a position that somebody else would take. The positions that I've taken are my own. It's how I see things, and I do believe in a democracy that spirited debate and differences of opinions not only are welcome, they're actually helpful. I think that at the end of the day, we're stronger because of them. But I think it's pretty hard to deny if we're talking about people who are addicted to substances and homeless, whether we're talking about women who are not being given the opportunity to own the space that they live on, and to have the right for their own sense of the pursuit of happiness, or whether we're talking about how we treat people who come to our country under desperate circumstances, that at the end of the day, the idea of advancing the human spirit is most important. There are lots of different ways to get there, but having humanity, having sensitivity, having a sense of generosity is, I think, essential to realizing our full potential.
Yes. I would agree 1,000% with that. Well, again, I thank you for being my guest this evening. I was very excited that I was going to get to introduce you to my listeners, because I often come to you for advice, and I always get good advice from you. And I just wanted them to know why I'm so proud to be your brother. And so my guest this evening has been Dr. Bob Reid, the head of the Max Foundation. I know I always say it wrong. There's a couple of letters before it, but I'm dyslexic, and I want to get those backwards. So it gets you in trouble with your employers there. Just some housekeeping things before we go off air. I just want to remind everybody that Tuesday is International Suicide Prevention Day, and that in the city of Claremont, there's a program being put together by Tri-City Mental Health and also the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill from 3 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. at the United Church of Christ on Harrison and Harvard in Claremont. There's no charge for this program, from what I understand. It's about learning how to talk to people who are dealing with depression, maybe suicidal thoughts, some of what to say, some of what not to say. So almost everybody knows somebody who's suffering from depression. So I really want to recommend people going to see that. I'd like to give a shout out to the guys who were on retreat with me this last weekend. My goodness, I started to speak Southern. And thanks, guys, and I appreciate the fact that you're hooking me up to do a couple more retreats coming up. I'm grateful for that. But most of all, those of you who tune in every week. I have some of the smartest listeners all around the world, and I thank you that you take time to send me letters, to send me emails, and let me know what you're getting from the program, but also the fact that you continue to help support this program financially. I also want to thank our sponsors, Claremont Pharmacy, because they are helping us stay on the air. And as we're in the last minute of this hour, if no one's told you this week that they love you, let me be the first, and thank you for tuning in to Viewpoint with Father John. We'll be back next week.